Hey folks, welcome to this Data Foundations panel. We're going to get started in just a few moments. We're going to give folks time to trickle in. Greetings, folks. Again, we're going to get started very shortly here. This is the Data Foundations panel, future-proofing the business with cloud leverage. We just want to give some of today's attendees a chance to join our panel. Okay, it looks like we have some of our attendees joining us now. Welcome again to the Data Foundations panel, future-proofing the business with cloud leverage. I'm Doug Henschen, Vice President and Principal Analyst at Constellation Research. I'm your moderator for this panel, and I'm really excited to be joined by three cloud analytics experts, industry leaders, starting with Phil Huddleston. He's partner and CTO at McKinsey & Company. Hello, Phil. We've got Tomer Sharan. He's founder and chief product officer at Dremio. Greetings, Phil.
Great to be here.
And Ben Shine, he's SVP and SVP of product here at Domo. You might have been just seeing him in the Q&A session. Formerly a big Domo customer when he was at Target. So here we're here to talk about how to take advantage of cloud to give you flexibility, speed of deployment, scalability, and perhaps some of that magic promised by generative AI. If I had to summarize some of the trends I'm seeing, I'd start with generative AI. I mean, everybody's talking about it, but everything seems to be sort of in private preview now as far as official features. Lots of questions about costs. Another big topic, multi-cloud capabilities. So you can use software and skills and data flexibly wherever you need it. Also, customer interest in data fabrics and mesh architectures. So you can access data, make use of that data wherever it lives. And also rising interest in FinOps, helping you to take advantage of the cloud, but get more bang for the buck. So at McKinsey, Phil, you deal with many customers, many vendors. Let's start with you. What are your thoughts on some of those trends? Any I missed, and you know, things that come top of mind for you these days?
Yeah, thanks, Doug. I think, you know, the list of topics is certainly an exciting one. And I think in particular, you know, this AI and ML space is one that's been on a lot of people's minds for a while. But now generative AI in particular seems to have just taken over not only that conversation, but all the conversations.
A lot of conversations.
Exactly. And I think it has, you know, interesting implications for us also in how we think about the role of data in how we work with you know, generative AI. So excited to unpick that. At the same time, I think all the conversations are still there in terms of the role of multi-cloud and hybrid cloud, and how do we you know, get the most out of that. And in particular, you know, we're seeing a lot of people look at the role of, you know, developer experiences and you know, getting the most in terms of how we, you know, as enterprises get the value from, you know, our choices that we're making in cloud. And then of course on the FinOps side, you know, that's something that everyone needs to do, and you know, often people aren't getting enough into the FinOps game until, you know, too late in their journey to the cloud. So yeah, a lot of exciting topics.
You want to be proactive, not reactive. Tomer, Dremio promotes a fabric approach. What's the use case for this architecture, and how would you compare and contrast with this data fabric or data mesh idea that a lot of people are now talking about?
Yeah, we're you know, we're involved in a lot of data mesh projects these days. That's become a very hot topic and hot term for many organizations, especially in the enterprise. And the idea there is really kind of common sense, right? It's you know, as companies grow and there are more teams and more people that want to use data, having just a single centralized team manage all that data and, you know, clean it and make sure it's okay and test it and so forth is is just not something that's feasible anymore. So the idea of a data mesh is start to kind of federate that ability to manage data, treat it like it's a product, right? So every team within the organization can treat their own data as if it's a product, and then that becomes available to others in the organization. And so that's the idea of a data mesh, is really data as a product. And data fabric, I'd say, well, it sounds kind of similar, really augments that by providing the ability to connect to different data sources. And these days companies, often they have a lot of data in kind of the lake and the lake house, and that's what we focus on. But also, we connect to many different sources, so that when they do want to incorporate data from their existing relational databases or NoSQL databases with the data that's in the lake, that's super simple, and users don't even have to think about where the data lives.
Yeah. The shorthand I often hear is mesh is what practitioners put in place. Fabric is more likely to be the product that you use to support it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Ben, anything to add on these trends or other trends that come to mind, and maybe how Domo might be addressing some of the headlines from today's event?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the one thing that comes to mind is a little bit more of how do we democratize the data mesh? Maybe to pull on a little where Tomer was going there, just in terms of a lot of these technologies, while great, are still just for a certain high code, pro code segment of the population. So a lot of what we try to do is honor that. I love a good data scientist, a good data engineer, but how do we leverage that in a way that it's not just a data scientist or an engineer that has access to those? So I'm excited to sort of unpack some of these trends, and very aligned to, I think, where we're driving the product as well at Domo.
Okay, great. So let's dig in on that first controversial topic, generative AI. Now, there's going to be an entire Domopalooza panel on this topic at 3:30 Eastern Time, called Beyond the Hype, Exploring the Evolution and Applications of Generative AI. But they're going to focus on analytics and BI, more the Domo context. So panelists, let's talk about the bigger picture, possibilities for data, cloud infrastructure. Phil, take us deeper into the conversations you're having with customers, and maybe some of the low-hanging fruit that folks listening in here should be preparing for.
Yeah, this is such a fast-moving space, and frankly, the landscape is changing. Every time you wake up, and I think the conversations that were happening last year, there was a lot of focus on the cost of some of these things. How do you really scale this? And even some people starting to think about, well, do we want to move some things from the cloud back on premise to be able to get a control of the costs of building things with AI? And I think now we're seeing on the flip side the power of these widely available large language models coming available, hard to compete with what you can do on premise, but also, frankly, at the same time, a lot of innovation in making the power of these things available on almost consumer grade hardware. So this is again, a couple of game changers even in recent months that are going to greatly impact how enterprises think about getting into that game. At the same time, while there's the explosion of use cases, people with good ideas, and I know there's a whole panel on types of ideas. I think at the same time, a lot of the experts who've been talking about the value in more integrated approaches to data, whether it's a data lake or a data mesh or data fabric, whatever it is, now realizing that data is really the missing secret ingredient to make these large language models and generative AI really sing. And it's not just the data that's available on the internet that's used to train these things, but it's the proprietary data that you have as an enterprise, and how can you use that to kind of create your own AI advisor and AI expert to help internally or with customers, whatever the use case is, really tap into that. And I think my hope is that brings even more focus to the investments that people make on data as well. And then we'll also see kind of the continued focus on the AI, ML tooling, ML ops that we need to sustain some of these investments that are being made. So that's kind of high level. A lot of the conversations where we're having now is how do we make sure we have the right things in support of these great ideas people now have.
Great. So Tomer, what are the possibilities you're seeing for your customers? Are the catalogs, SQL queries going to be augmented by natural language interfaces? How will things change for your customers?
Yeah, I mean, I think one aspect of of generative AI is the ability to automate a lot of things that today are manual, right? Whether it's the writing of SQL queries, right? We see Microsoft with with Copilot do that for software development, and it's early days, but I do think this simplifies things from from auto completing your SQL queries to doing making data curation easier, where you're not having to specify exactly the regular expression that you need to use to figure out a zip code from an address or things like that. And so there are lots and lots of opportunities, and I think this spans every industry actually. So what we'll see, I think, is less about like a set of new companies, but really every existing software company kind of augmenting their products, right? Adding capabilities, whether it's marketing tools that send emails, adding the ability to automatically write those emails, right, and optimize them and A/B test them, right? Data companies and BI companies like Domo, right, being able to automate some of that building of reports. And I think the other thing I'm seeing is my kids can spend less time on their homework, and that means they spend a lot more time on TikTok and other things. So it's going to free up a lot of time for a lot of people. That's one example.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
But preparation, enhancement of data. Go ahead, Ben.
I was gonna say, my kids have to get off their school computer though and go to their own computer because it's blocked on the school
Oh, it's
computer,
blocked.
right?
Okay. Here in the Valley, they don't block it.
Ben, maybe we need a little dose of reality here. What are some of the cautions customers should keep in mind?
Yeah. No, look, it is very exciting, and certainly even internally, like we were saying with Copilot and other things, there are lots of just internal efficiencies for us as a product company. But I think the things that worry me, or just thinking about, is sort of what Phil was getting at, of like how external some of these things are. Certainly with OpenAI, and like I don't have control over that. So I think the key for me has really been pushing our teams to, yes, we want to experiment with this, we want to use it, but how do we do it in ways that are open to a model I build on my own, or open to a third party like OpenAI. And I think over time there'll be a lot more specialized large language models, right? And so whether those are things you can install within our ecosystem, or that you have a individual relationship with and can call within our ecosystem, I think that's going to be part of making it as useful and relevant. And so not walking into one model or always being external versus having some option to go back and forth, I think would be the key.
And Ben, I think that point of data ownership is a key one. And I think that's probably the biggest one in everyone's mind is, how do I get the power from these things without giving away my IP?
Yeah. No, and even, I mean, you were mentioning on premise, even within the cloud, right? Like we have a lot of customers who've already gone through all the security review with us to put their, data into our cloud. They're fine with that, but they don't want it to leave to someone else's, like, right? Again, there's another hop. So how do you manage that or control that? So yeah, it's really, really interesting.
I kind of worry about, wallpaper syndrome, maybe for a day or a week, or maybe even a month, people will carefully vet, they keep talking in these offerings about the need for a human in the loop. And maybe for a time, people will vet it and be careful about it. If it's code, it's one thing. It goes through a review and a process. But if it's text or, a more casual user, are they just going to hit send or hit use this without really vetting it?
Yeah, but I think sometimes things are a numbers game, right? If you're, I don't know, a consumer marketing company and you're sending out 1 million emails trying to get some response rate, maybe it's better for you to be able to send out 3 times the number of emails. And as I hate it as being typically on the other side of that, getting all these random phone calls and emails. But for a company that does that, maybe that's a good business, right? So I do think it depends on. There are use cases where accuracy matters a lot, and that is our life. Obviously, at Dremio, there's no commingling of data of customers. Everybody, when they run a SQL query, they need to get accurate responses. I mean, that's what lakehouses are about. But I do think there are a lot of use cases in the world that,
well, I'm thinking of a Domo user that has to present a report or insight or something to people, and are they just leaning too much on the tech? What, are you thinking this through, Ben?
No, I mean, I think there has to be some human in the loop. I mean, Tomer, what I like what you said is ultimately the data will prove it out. I mean, it's a little harder with the user, but right, if the emails aren't working, we'll see that. And you'll say, no, we need more. We can't send out 1 million because the emails aren't good anymore, right? And even internally, right, if how many meetings is it going to take for someone to lazily just trust the, generative AI to do their job for them? And again, maybe it works for a lot of things, but at some point, if it's not productive or if it leads to a really bad decision, there'll be a conversation, right? Of, well, why did we do that? We should have thought about it first. So,
all right. Any last words on generative? Well, I think I put off our own shortlist update for augmented BI and analytics features. I didn't put it off. It's normally in August, but I'm doing a big market overview on products. But I didn't see any need to update it until a lot of these features are generally available. And I think there's terms of use on things like OpenAI such that you're going to see a lot of code scripts and examples and not so much commercialized products. Anyways, let's move on to multi-cloud. It can have a lot of meanings. Customers might have data on multiple clouds, perhaps due to mergers and acquisitions, data residency requirements, or just popularity. They have a lot of activity over on Google around marketing, AdWords. So they need that cloud, plus they're over on AWS. And there is also multiple ways to bring data together. So let's break it down a little. Phil, what are the most common multi-cloud demands you're encountering? What's your advice been when it comes to centralizing versus virtualizing approach?
Yeah, look, I think right now, especially the data sovereignty and kind of compliance type use cases are dominating a lot of the conversations. But I think, we still see a lot of these. And, I think the consolidate versus centralize, versus kind of decentralize, there's going to be a different answer for each company. But what I think is most important here is being kind of deliberate in how you design these things. And, Tomer, when I hear you talk about, the kind of mesh and the fabric, I think that concept absolutely makes sense, as long as you're not abstracting away kind of the mess that you refuse to solve. And that's where we see a lot, some companies still saying, well, okay, it's too messy and it's too hard to fix the mess. And so therefore, let's slap another layer on top. And frankly, that's not going to help you, solve the problem. And I think the other, common trend that, in a lot of discussions comes up is, this concept of containerization and abstracting away from, what the cloud providers are offering. And for some companies, that's absolutely the right answer. But, let's not pretend that that's actually getting you away from lock-in. That in itself is its own form of lock-in. And in some senses, you're actually giving away some of the value of the hyperscalers and the native services that they offer. And so, again, I think it's as much about being deliberate in how you're making those choices and understanding the tech debt and the risks that you're willing to accept, knowing you might have to come back and address some of those things later, as it is to just say, one size fits all. We should do, centralization. We should do, decentralized, or we should do hybrid, single cloud.
So
yeah, I don't think it's about lock.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I don't think it's so much about lock-in though, but if you do look at the kind of using the native cloud services, in our world, right? You could use Athena and Synapse and different things. Every enterprise is now multi-cloud, and the reason they're multi-cloud is not usually a strategic decision. Sometimes that's the case, but it's because they acquired some other company, some new executive showed up, and they had a relationship with Microsoft in their previous job, and so now the company's moving some workloads from AWS to Microsoft. And next thing you know, every Fortune 500 has multiple clouds. And I think if you do start saying, okay, I'm going to use the things that only work in one cloud, well, then now you have to teach your team to use all these different services, right? And so where we, one of the things customers love about Dremio and love about, Snowflake and other services like this is that they can use the same technology, for all their data assets, regardless of where they live. And that, that saves them a lot of money, saves them a lot of training. It's much easier to manage. So it's not just the lock-in, but I do think the lock-in comes into play in a big way, especially when it comes to how the data is stored, right? Once you put data into a data warehouse, right, that you are locked into that data warehouse. You cannot, like I've heard a lot of people say, I want to get off Teradata, right? Never happens, right? Because, or it takes years to happen. Because there's so much going on in that system that you can't just like take the data one day, freeze everything, move it somewhere else, right? And that's one of the great things about kind of these new open architectures and data lakes where, data is stored in open formats. And yeah, you can use Dremio on that data, but you can use, a different engine on that same data. And tomorrow, if there's a new query engine or processing engine, gets created by some new startup or university, you can point that at the same data and use it too, right? You don't have to move everything to use something new, right?
Yeah,
So
look,
go ahead, Phil.
No, look, I'm not, not debating kind of the merits of having that strategy, which can abstract some of these things. What if I take the, containerization of applications example, you'll see companies who will make major investments to build that kind of assumption of portability in, but they never exercise that. And so, if you're never going to exercise that, was that a good investment? I mean, that's the sort of questions you should make. And it's probably a different set of criteria you would look at for data versus applications.
Yeah.
But I think still kind of that understanding of, what's the value you give up by, foregoing some of the native services, which in reality, some native services are better than others. If you kind of look in data or analytics spaces versus, what's the value you get by kind of buying that optionality to move away from one thing to another. And that's
let's talk about basic physics too, Tomer. Accessing data wherever it lives sounds great, but what about performance? Aren't there times, particularly with analytics, when you have to move it or copy it to get that snappy performance you want? You want it in a centralized place.
Yeah, I mean, so kind of two different things, right? One is like you want to run the processing close to the data. That's always true for performance reasons, for networking, how much you pay to move data around, that's also an important factor. So there are things, for example, in our system that we do to make it so that if you do need to kind of combine data from different sources, you can get really high performance still, right? And that happens through automatic caching of the data. So you're not going to S3 twice for the same data, right? It's cached on the local SSDs of the the EC2 instances or the Azure instances, the Azure VMs. It comes into play with materializations. We create these things called reflections, where the data again is cached on one side, right, versus the other. And it comes into play by pushing down as much of the processing as possible into the where the data sits, right? So if you have to do a four-way join, two tables in in US East and two tables in US West, well, it'd be much better if you could do the two-way join in each side before you kind of try to combine that, right? So you do try to minimize as much of the data movement as possible, but I'd say also beyond that, it's using the same technologies in different locations is also beneficial, right? So can you use the same technology, in your on-prem data center as you can in the cloud? Well, if you can, that's really beneficial, right? If you can't, then yeah, you got to manage two different systems and deal with how the data is going to get moved around and train the people on how to use different systems.
Okay, we've got a question from our audience, and I do want to encourage folks, you can use the chat to submit questions. And Ben, I'll pose this to you. Maybe what are the different levels of data integration and what makes them more appropriate for certain use cases versus others? Lightweight connectors versus federated versus native. Maybe you can speak to this.
And we'll be continuing to talk about this with some of the new releases of our cloud amplifier product, including GA with Dremio today, which is exciting. I think in some ways for these large clouds where we're looking at Cloud Amplifier, Dremio, Databricks, Redshift, BigQuery, and Snowflake, connectors will somewhat fade away for us. Right? That's always been our bread and butter, and it's been great. A lot of people love connectors in Domo. I can pull in my Adobe data, I can pull in Salesforce data, et cetera. So I do think it's a dynamic shift for us that if you're using some of these technologies like Tomer and Phil were talking about, that it's much better to try to have a more native exposure. So then I can make decisions once I have that exposure. Do I want to move some data into Domo? Do I want to combine data, from a spreadsheet I have and then combine it with something from Dremio and then look at that in Excel or looking at that in Domo and having all those options available. And so I think there's still, certainly like an Excel file, again, back to like that dynamic of like the sort of end user versus the more technical user. Like, that's great. If there's an easy way for me to get an Excel file in or even get data from Salesforce, because I haven't yet done the work to wire it into my new cloud provider, or I'm switching clouds, or like Phil was saying with Teradata or Tomo was like all those things, right? And so I think it'll be a balance. It'll still live there, but I think it will be a shift for people who've been using Domo for a long time. This new native integration approach will be a different way of thinking, which also then will let them leverage some of the work, like what Dremio does with the different caching and all that logic. We can leverage that logic, and then it just shows up as a full citizen in Domo. And then that's a lot of what we are trying to focus on from this multi-cloud environment is, how do I make it so the end user doesn't care, right? The end user doesn't care if most of this dashboard is fast because of what Dremio did, and then some of it's because someone did a data flow in Domo, and some of it is like that could all happen, and those are the right decisions. But as an end user, I should just know I get my data, I get it quickly, I get it, in the right format, I can take action on it. And so that's sort of our goal, is how do we make that data experience for the end user great, while having the technical backend to balance all those different pieces. So,
All right, good stuff, Ben. Look, time is running short, so I wanted to close on that topic of FinOps, given economic concerns. First, I clarify that FinOps is not financial operations. This involves everybody, and that term is a mashup of finance and DevOps. So it's about finance, IT, and the business working together to set guidelines, promote best practices, and consolidate purchasing. Tomer, there's a lot of cloud hype about elastic scaling and the consumption-based pricing, yet scaling and consumption always seem to go in one direction. I'm hearing a lot of frustration around cloud costs. What are some best practices you would point to help customers save money?
Yeah, I'd say in terms of the system management, the important things are to set kind of the parameters, right? In terms of kind of cost control, right? So you have some predictability, right? For example, in our system, you can set up like the maximum number of replicas of an engine, right? So that guarantees you're not going to spend more than X amount, right? In terms of your consumption. And there's workload management capabilities that can control, if you want to control how much the team of interns is allowed to consume, right? When they submit queries versus, maybe the CEO, it's okay if they want to refresh their dashboard every minute and, run these massive queries, maybe that's okay, right? So also controlling it by person and by type of workload, I think that's another best practice. But then more realistically, I think it starts with the architecture, right? Ultimately, if you take an approach of building an architecture based on expensive systems or having to have lots of copies of data in the organization, right? Those costs are going to add up, and ultimately it's going to be expensive, right? And so there's also kind of what are the decisions you're making when you're designing the system, right? So that you're minimizing the amount of data copies, right? And that's I think another important thing.
Okay, Ben, you can't manage what you can't measure, so analytics are really important in this area. Can you talk about cost insights, both for Domo customers within Domo, but also how Domo can be used to analyze and understand some of the non-Domo general cloud costs, platform costs, things like that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think in some ways our sort of position as sort of the place to combine data from multiple sources has always served us well here. And, a lot of times people don't eat their own dog food, but we certainly do, right? In terms of using it to manage our own internal cost, knowing what we're spending money on, but also, I've had talks with customers who, right, are using Domo, but then they're also using Snowflake, and then they're also they have old DB2 jobs that they're monitoring. And if they can bring all that data together and have a central place to monitor their business, which is IT and infrastructure, I think even a Target, one of the big use cases, who's the guy who's been active in our user community, was around like retiring the old DB2 infrastructure, right? And keeping track of that and all that. And no one put that into like, we need a BI tool for that. But so that's where we fit in really well is, hey, let's manage this. Let's figure out what's going on. And certainly we're thinking about, how do we have, quick starts and things like that help people, do that out of the box, especially if some of them, are there and love seeing people use our platform to manage their own infrastructure as well.
Okay, Phil, I'm sure, consulting firm like McKinsey offers lots of advice on this topic. What are some of the latest trends, best practices you're seeing, and maybe some takeaway advice you'd offer to folks joining this panel?
Yeah, look, I think there's tons of great advice, and what Tomer and Ben shared resonates quite a bit. On the technical approaches, there's quite a bit that enterprises can do in terms of the monitoring, the analytics, the auto scaling. I think the piece that we often see is kind of missing is the more kind of strategic lens towards it, to really think about the demand management, the consumption forecasting, not in the lens of a single team, but at the enterprise. And with that, really engaging the CFO and kind of the enterprise leadership in those conversations earlier in the journey on the cloud, rather than waiting till you're already spending 100 million or whatever it is on cloud and try to figure out, okay, well, how did we end up here? And I think Doug, what you said on the kind of finance, DevOps, and business is key. And often we find that business piece is maybe the missing one. That you have the strong finance skills, you have the strong DevOps, but again, going back to that enterprise-wide view and strategic look, that business involvement from early on is key to the success of FinOps.
And it's always a problem. How have you promoted it? How do you get them involved? How do you kind of anticipate. It's like the surprise merger and acquisition that threw everything out the window.
Yeah, well, that's the million-dollar question, right? Is how do you make someone care about something that it's not on their radar yet? But ultimately, I think enough companies have been through this journey, and I think there's great cases of what good looks like versus bad. That you can have those right dialogues early on with the tech and the business. To elevate the role and show what's possible to head off some of those kind of later stage situations.
It's really, to me, when I hear that the folks have organized a center of excellence or a FinOps team, whatever term they use, it's getting somebody in the business there at the table to discuss it on a regular basis. So they're thinking about it, and that's what I think the leaders are doing well, kind of creating the structure to make sure it's a constant conversation. Well, listen, folks, this has been great fun, but it's all the time we have. I want to thank our guests here, Phil Huddleston of McKinsey & Company, Tomer Sharan of Dremio, and Ben Shine of Domo. This is Doug Henschen of Constellation Research. I want to thank you for joining us and wish you the best of success. And don't forget that generative AI panel at 3:30 Eastern Time. Thanks, folks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.